What's up, YouTube? It's the Action Figure Grader coming back to you with another video. I've already covered some other recent announcements in the graded collectibles industry, and I would be remiss not to include a recent announcement last week by Collector Archive Services. As you guys know, I use them pretty regularly. I know the owners, and they came out with an announcement regarding their expansion plans, revised turnaround times, and I'm going to go through that, but I think the more important discussion is taking a look at what the implications are regarding turnaround times for both Collector Archive Services and Action Figure Authority, the two main grading companies for action figures here in the U.S. Obviously, the UKG is over across the pond, but there's some other implications I wanted to talk about, and a couple of other interesting kind of trends I'm seeing, and just kind of go through a number of different topics as it relates to the graded collectibles industry as we finish into the second half of 2021 and into 2022. So all of those are kind of be topics that we're going to talk about. But first, let's take a look at what Collector Archive Services announced last week. They mentioned that it's been a substantial year-over-year increases in the volume of submissions. Just like everybody else, they're flooded. And, they mentioned last year's kind of earth-shaking events. I try not to mention that word because it gets flagged, so I'm not going to mention it. But they said in response to the boom in collectibles grading, other grading companies have shut down completely, and they're right. AFA is shutting down certain tiers. UKG completely shut down any new submissions. CGC, while they have not shut down, their turnaround times have significantly increased. PSA for trading cards, they've also shut down. So Collector Archive Services, hey, look, we're not shutting down, but we're doing our best to kind of keep up. And so they are moving. They talk about that. So just keep in mind that if you have some submissions that you're planning on sending to Collector Archive Services, they're moving towards the end of this month. So make sure that you have the correct location and address. All of that's covered on their website. But I think it's like towards the end of June 28th, they're going to take a weekend off, as they talk about here. They're not going to shut down at all, not for one single day. All of the move is occurring over one weekend. They're moving right down the street to a larger facility. They're going to be shut down Friday at the end of the day, move on Saturday and Sunday, and then be right back open for business on Monday. So that's a major plus to them, I think, as it relates to trying to expand facilities. So keep that in mind. But, they mentioned, they go into a little bit more detail about turnaround times. And, they, just like AFA, they work on different tiers. They have tiers 1 through 3, with tier 1 being like carded figures, carded action figures, standard retail packaging. Typically, that's been 30 to 60 days turnaround time. And what they're basically saying is 30 to 60 days beyond the usual estimate. So for tier 1 items, such as loose graded Star Wars figures, where there's not really much customization that's needed since they're already in their system, or for mint on card Star Wars figures, G.I. Joes, those standard size action figures, it's going to be, instead of 30 to 60 days, it's going to be more like 90 to 120. And that's already, honestly, that's already been my experience. I've already talked about that in other videos. My recent submissions over the last, I'd say, 6 to 8 months have all been kind of in that 90 to 120 day turnaround time. So not terrible, and certainly beats what Action Figure Authority is now doing. We've talked about them, and I'll show you that again in a second on a different tab here, but keep that in mind. But I think where you're going to really see the longer drawn out times is on their tiers 2 and 3, where you have some customization. As you guys know, I have a number of different really highly custom graded pieces, such as prototypes and, custom things. And those normally can take, anywhere from 4 to, I'd say, 8 months. So add another 2 months on top of that. And just keep that in mind if you do have custom items, that turnaround time is going to be pretty long. It was already pretty long because of the details involved with those custom cases, but it's going to be even longer now. So that I want to show that. So it's just add up roughly 2 months, and then going back to the Action Figure Authority's announcement that I went through last week. They have the delays in receiving and invoicing. They said 6+ weeks. Collector Archive Services, in the email that I received, said that their time from when the items arrive at the facilities to when you'll get invoiced and get put in the queue for grading, they're estimating 2 to 4 weeks. Now, I think that might be a little low personally. I mean, I've had some that have been less than 2 weeks, depending on the size of the order. When I've sent in larger orders, that's when I've noticed that the time from arrival at the facilities to actually being queued up and being billed for it, that's where the longer turnaround times is for logging them in. And, you know, part of it's because I send a lot of items that they haven't graded yet, whether it's modern vintage collection or prototypes or bootlegs. So it takes time to manually enter all those in. But anyway, there's, you know, CAS is saying 2 to 4 weeks from when the items arrive at the facilities to when you'll actually get invoiced and queued up. And so it's 6+ weeks right now with AFA, as I highlighted here. But, you know, again, going back to their scale for express grading, they've temporarily closed the express and economy tiers, but they're saying it's going to be 4+ months beyond the anticipated. So again, you're looking at between 6 and 9 months. I'd say 6 to 8 months safely with AFA submissions, versus, let's say, on the outside, in terms of the longest time frame, about 4 months with Collector Archive. So there's a couple of implications there. Number one, I think that if you're just a collector and you're looking to get your stuff preserved, you can't go wrong with Collector Archive. I've been very, very happy with them. Their quality control has been excellent. Their customer service is easily second to none. Their transparency, which is a big thing in my book, seeing the grades, seeing the labels before it leaves their facility to make sure there's no errors, or if I didn't have any questions or concerns. It's nice to see that information before it actually arrives back, whereas with AFA, you don't see that. And hopefully that changes as AFA updates their website. But there's that. I think that the other important thing is that AFA and Collector Archive are both expanding. They're both going to bigger, larger facilities. They're both going through major hiring to add employees. But here's my concern. How does quality control get affected by it? We've already seen with CGC over at Comics, and I talked about this, you're seeing cracked cases, you're seeing mislabeled cases, you're seeing cases with insects and human hairs and bits of plastic from the assembly process being packaged in with the comics and actually damaging them. So clearly, their new employee hires, they just came out last week and said we're going to add another 100 employees by the end of June, or excuse me, by the end of the summer. That's another 100 employees at one facility they're adding. So they got to train all those people. Well, Collector Archive and AFA are going to have to go through that same process. They got to train people, not only in the shipping department, but in the assembly and manufacturing department for these different cases and labeling, authentication. It's quite a bit of work. And my concern is that with both AFA and CAS, that their quality control, their quality of the product dips. And just like CGC has had those issues. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but it's a real challenge. And I also want to mention that, you know, when I've talked about this in the past, that one of the owners of Collector Archive, Chris Whitlock, he said, look, it's not as easy as flipping a switch. You know, I've always complained that, hey, you've known about this collectibles boom for a while now. And he said it's not as easy as flipping a switch. You got to add employees, you got to add facilities, you got to, you know, change your processes to make it more efficient. And what happens, you know, they're taking on some risk. You know, both of these companies, as they expand, they're investing in more capital expenditures, hard fixed assets such as facilities and equipment, and then also the human element. They're investing in more labor and training. All of those are expensive. So to a certain extent, both AFA and CAS are taking a risk that the collectibles industry and the graded collectibles industry is going to continue to grow. And no one knows what's going to happen, right? People are starting to get back to normal. They're starting to use their discretionary income on other things other than collectibles. They're not cooped up at home anymore. So you're going to see more discretionary income being spent on going out, boozing, going out to restaurants, live events, sports. Vacations is a big one. I'm going to Florida at the end of the month. I'm going to Virginia in 2 months. So those are big expenses when you got a family of 4 going on a flight and hotels and rental cars and everything else. So that's less money that at least me personally, that would be spending on collectibles. And what Chris is trying to say is, hey, look, we're taking all of the upfront risk to a certain extent that the market is going to stay the same in 6 to 9 or 12 or 15 months. And there's no guarantee of that. So I understand his point of view on that. There's certainly some risks that they do all this ramping up, all of this facilities expansion, all of these new hires, and then in 9 months, we're back to where we were, 2 years ago, and their volume is less, their submission volume is less. And then they're left with people twiddling their thumbs and without enough to do. So there's always risk on that. But I think that the sustained boom that we've had in graded collectibles has made it past, I think, that inflection point of, okay, now we're starting to get back to normal. And there's been no let up in submission volume based on everything I've seen online. So it's just food for thought. Is like, okay, hey, look, what's going to happen in 15 months? And who's going to be better positioned? I do think that with collectors who just want to have their stuff archived and preserved and, graded and all that kind of thing, this announcement by Collector Archive Services is a shot right across the bow to AFA. We're not shutting down anything. All of our submission tiers are open. There's going to be delays, as you would expect. Probably about 30 to 60 days is what they're saying. And then the turnaround times from items arriving to being processed and queued up in the grading queue is delayed a little bit. But I think that this facilities expansion is perfect timing for them to better compete with AFA. We all know that AFA is kind of the standard bearer, both in resale value and in collectors' minds in terms of how, who they view as the leader in the graded action figure industry. But Collector Archive Services is coming up pretty quick, I can tell you that, just based on some of the prices I've seen for items that have been graded by Collector Archive Services, both on eBay and in the Facebook groups. Some very, very rare, expensive items are going for many thousands of dollars, and I would argue the same or more in some cases than if it was graded by AFA. So it'll be interesting to see there. But I think that the risk of expansion and then things slowing down and then the risk of quality control are the two big issues facing the grading companies, as we talked about. Now, one final thing before we wrap this video up. I want to give credit to John Miko, who is the head admin in the Facebook Vintage Collection group. And he saw my video on the recent kind of high prices for graded Hasbro Vintage Collection figures. There's been some high prices, and I'll go through a couple more in a second here. But John's point, and I think this is something I thought about too, but he put it very well and very succinctly in a message to me. He said, are buyers willing to pay more to get an item that's already been graded versus buying items that are fairly easy to find, such as current, Vintage Collection 2.0 and grading them themselves? And it's a great question. And I think that the data shows that that's the case, that there is a certain segment of the collecting community that doesn't want to wait 6 to 9 months for their items to be graded. And so they're just buying it graded already. And especially in auctions, it's very competitive and the prices are well beyond what I would expect. And I think that the best comparable for that is the graded comic industry. That's something obviously I've just got into within the last year. And if you look at graded comics, some of those prices for a high grade Star Wars comic goes well above a near mint plus example that's ungraded. And part of that is grading risk. People don't want to take the risk that the photos are what they appear to be, and that it's a 9.8 grade, and then they have to get it graded, and then they got to wait 6 months, and then what happens if the grade comes back lower? So there's a certain grading risk element there that some buyers don't want to take. But I think also a lot of it is like, hey, this is a comic I've been wanting. I'm willing to pay a premium to not have to deal with 6 months turnaround or more turnaround time. So just really quickly, let me show you some recent examples. Some of these I've covered in the past, but this is a one that's not that difficult to find. And yes, it has gone up in value, but this one sold for $229, and that's the Rogue One Imperial Assault Tank Driver. I mean, you can still pick up a near mint, flawless example of that. I'd say for $65 to $85, go get it graded for 40 or 50 bucks versus paying $230. So it's something to think about, is that, this is clearly a case of, well, it's high grade, it's also uncirculated, which certainly commands a little bit of a premium, but not a particularly rare figure. This is one I've covered in the past before. You can find absolutely dead mint Dr. Afras out there. Mine graded at 95 with Collector Archive Services, and I paid $26 for it. This one graded 9.25. It is uncirculated again, so you get a little bit of a premium there, but not a $224 premium. That's 10 times what I paid for mine ungraded. Plus, I paid, $40 to $50 grading, so I got about $75 or $80 after shipping in it versus $225. So there's just plenty of examples like that. This Rogue One Darth Vader is a very, very recent release. It just came out last fall. It is a 9.0, but it sold for $190. Mine graded 95. I paid $17 for a collector grade Big Bad Toy Store example. It graded 95 with Collector Archive. And so I've got a total of, let's call it $60 in it. So, versus $190. And, this is an older release, but you can find plenty of sealed boxes with the rocket firing FET for, I'd say, $175 for a sealed mail-away box that you could send in yourself for uncirculated grading. And it came back with a 9.0, which is a fairly standard score, I think. But even that one sold for $1,000 in an auction. I don't know what happened there. That seems like market manipulation a little bit, but $175 plus grading, I'm willing to take that grading risk versus paying $1,000 for one of these that's already been graded. So, finally, the another one that you can easily find. It's an older one, but this mail order Boba Fett prototype armor, a 9.0. And that wasn't even uncirculated. So someone just sent that, already unsealed out of the box. But you can get one of those still sealed in the box for $130 to $150, and that one sold for $250. So, it just raises the question of are buyers just being impatient? They don't want to deal with the grading process right now because the submission turnaround times are so long. Now, that's different, though, than resellers. Resellers are still always going to be submitting items, right? Because they're buying, they're grading, and then they're flipping it for a profit in the current environment. But with these longer turnaround times, something that I don't think we've really talked about, maybe a little, I've hinted at it a little bit, is that, these resellers, they got all of their money tied up in these figures, and then they had to, on top of that, pay for the grading cost. So they've got a double whammy of all of their investment tied up for 6 to 8 months for, at least with AFA, before you get it back. What happens if the collectibles market turns south? Just like AFA and Collector Archive Services are taking a risk with facilities expansion and adding new employees, resellers are taking a kind of a risk too. And at some point, the merry-go-round is going to come to a halt, or at least a slowdown. And I would imagine that given that there's a 6 to 8 month turnaround time, at least in the US right now, that there's going to be some resellers that get caught holding the bag if we have a dramatic drop-off in the market, in the collectibles market prices at some point in the future. Whether that happens towards the end of this year or into next year, I don't know. But it's something to think about as people start getting back to normal and start spending their discretionary income in other ways other than collectibles. Are these resellers going to be hit towards the end of this year and into next year if the market slows down a little bit? So it's all tied back into that risk of expansion with the grading companies. And these are all just kind of topics that are kind of intertwined, and I thought it would be an interesting topic. And if you like these kind of topics, I encourage you to subscribe for future content. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll be back soon.